Recording in progress.
We ready? Morning. Good morning. Yeah, test 1, 2. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all here for our hybrid event, the first of our second day here at COP26. I'm Margaret Kulo. I'm our Global Finance Practice Leader at WWF. It's a real pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for joining us in the room. Thank you for joining us online. Nice to see you. We're here to discuss accelerating adaptation in Asia through large-scale nature-based solutions. And we've got a great lineup of speakers. We'll go all around the region this morning. I would like to very first welcome a colleague of mine. I can think of no one better to lay the land for us here this morning to start our conversation. With that, I would like to welcome Mr. Manuel Pulgar-Vidal. He is the head of our global climate and energy practice at WWF, and also was the head of the COP in Lima, Peru, in COP20. So, Manuel, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's working. Thank you. Thank you, Margaret.
Morning.
Let me first of all welcome Mr. Minister, my friend. Thank you, Minister of Pakistan, for being here in this important event. The Director of Climate Change of Vietnam, and my friend Ede. A long time ago, we met the first time. And let me also highlight the importance of this kind of event. Because not in some way, we are straight addressing three things at the same time. Adaptation actions, clear adaptation actions, nature-based solutions as a concept that could support and could help those adaptation actions, and successful case studies. The case of recharging Pakistan and the case of accelerating adaptation in the Mekong Basin are two good cases that can showcase how well and how much we should continue pushing this kind of efforts. And the timing for this kind of event, it couldn't be better, because it's amazing how much nature-based solutions is getting traction, and how much nature-based solutions it is giving us a new opportunity, mostly in cases in which the country it is extremely vulnerable to climate change, or mostly in countries in which main source of emission it is related to a natural ecosystem. I am Peruvian, and in most of the Amazonian countries, the main source of emission it is related to deforestation and land use change. So for sure, for those countries, and I am sure that in Asia, in some Asian countries, it is the same. So for those countries, nature-based solutions could be a perfect tool, an accurate tool to address that main source of emission. And also it is important not only that nature-based solutions is getting traction, but even more is getting clarity, and that is key. Because we are in a time in which the climate debate is demanding and requesting us for clarity, because we do need to promote high-quality intervention. And when it is related to nature-based solutions, that quality intervention means that first, we do need to identify clearly what is that societal challenge that we are planning to address. And today, what we are going to discuss, it is adaptation. That is that big societal challenge that through a nature-based solution intervention, we could address effectively. The second, it is for sure that the intervention on nature must be sustainable and should promote biodiversity net gain and ecosystem integrity. And that is also a key element when we think about the concept of nature-based solution. And the third element, it is the need of a trade-off analysis and co-benefits that must include, and that is really important, the respect and recognition of rights of people who live on the ground, on the field. So those three elements, as much as we can continue pushing the idea of high quality intervention, will make the nation-based solutions even a more accurate tool to address those kind of societal challenges. And it is not only about clarity, that fortunately it is happening, as I've already mentioned, but also to avoid to put in competing relation some concepts. Ecosystem-based approach, ecosystem-based adaptation, nation-based solution are not competing terms. The three are important and the three are strongly complementary each to other. And that is something in which we should continue working on, because it is interesting how much in the political process on climate, fortunately in COP25, we got some recognition for the first time ever of the concept for the Standing Committee on Finance. But it is not exactly the same with the CBD discussion, the Global Biodiversity Framework discussion, in which draft 1.0 nature-based solution has been eliminated. And that really don't make sense. Don't have any sense. So we should work strongly in recover the concept into the CBD discussion, because it could be for them even more useful than for the climate community. So the point is that what we must have, it is the climate and the biodiversity communities developing together a concept that could benefit both of them. Also, it is important because of vulnerability. And today we will listen about how much these two initiatives in Pakistan and in Vietnam are addressing not only a reality in sense of an ecosystem change based on climate change, but also how much those changes are affecting the most vulnerable people. So in that sense, vulnerability, it is one of those key elements. And let me say, every time that I think in vulnerability, probably we are more used to thinking that it is this ecosystem vulnerability, what it is true. But it is beyond that. It is the social vulnerability. It is the economic vulnerability. Because climate change can affect economic activities in countries that depend a lot on fisheries, in countries that has a lot of hydropower facilities, so times of droughts can affect the economy in extreme situations. So vulnerability, it is one of those key elements to be addressed. And for sure, when we think on water, it is one of the most sensitive topics, because water, it is about scarcity, but also it is about floods, it is about disasters, when we think about climate change and its relation to water. And it is about livelihoods. It is about the people. So water, it is something in which we should connect even more to the climate debate. In my point of view, unfortunately, it is still too far away. And we do need to bring more closer a water discussion into the climate discussion, because it is a key element. And that is possible. We did it in the past with forests. Now oceans, it is being more closer to the climate debate than in the past. And I think that with water, we must insist on how to do. And finally, the importance of promoting climate finance. That is a key element, because until now, money, it is not enough. That is clear. It is interesting that I think there have been two countries, as France and some other, that announced a year or 18 months ago that they will triple the amount of climate finance for adaptation. What it is good, but still not enough. So these cases of Pakistan and Vietnam also are going to show us how important it is to continue pushing for more climate finance on adaptation. We have succeeded, not yet, because also we haven't yet closed the gap on climate finance for mitigation. But the gap, it is even bigger when we think about adaptation. So I am really happy to be in an event as this, to show how much these cases can demonstrate the need to promote more money, more flows of money, more climate finance to cover this kind of successful stories, to adapt and to promote nature-based solutions. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Ede, Margaret. And unfortunately, in 5 minutes, I have to run to some other event, but thank you for this opportunity and for this event.
We thank you very much, Manuel. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and enjoy the rest of your day. It's a very good reminder to us that while we are here over these couple of weeks to discuss limiting climate change to an average warming of 1.5 degrees, in order to have a planet that we are comfortable to live on, it's also important to understand that climate change is here already. And we're going to hear more about those impacts and hear more about how we manage those impacts from Pakistan to Vietnam to the Mekong. It's going to be a very good discussion this morning. Thanks so much for providing that introduction, Manuel. With that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, good friend here to the right, Ede Hijas Vasquez, who's with the Global Commission on Adaptation and the former Regional Director for Africa of the Sustainable Development Practice at the World Bank. It's a real pleasure to see you this morning. I'd like to hear some more from you on the the Global Commission on Adaptation work, more work on getting great finance into nature-based solutions, as Manuel mentioned.
Margaret, thank you very much. And Manuel, great to see you. I still remember the Lima Cup when I was Regional Director for Latin America in the World Bank. And so it's great to be here. And first, big thank you to WWF, because this is an organization that has been leading a lot of the thinking for decades on payment for environmental services. And it is that experience that is uniquely valuable to the whole question of nature-based solutions. So the Global Center on Adaptation, which emerged out of the work of the Commission, is an international organization solely focused on adaptation. Our obsession is adaptation, with the main message that, look, everybody needs to make sure that mitigations keep the world under 1.5 degrees. But even at that, the world needs to adapt. As Margaret was saying, the impacts of climate change have been felt today, but the impacts of climate change are already locked in for the next 20 years, and therefore adaptation is a must in every country, in every dimension, in everything. Now, why nature-based solution is so important is because the world cannot live with the illusion that you can build your way out of climate change impacts. I'm an engineer, and I love to put it more concrete to be able to adapt, and the reality is you can't do that without nature as the most important buffer to deal with the impacts of climate change. It's not going to happen for a variety of reasons. First, and the most practical, is a lot more cost effective. Second, the big problem with climate change is what is called the deep uncertainty. We're very certain about what may be happening on certain parameters like global temperature change, but when you're in a city, when you're in a coastline, at smaller scales, and at time frames of 20, 30, 50 years, which is what your infrastructure life asset is going to be, you have deep uncertainty. You really don't know the specific details of what is going to happen to that infrastructure in 30 years. And therefore, you need a buffer, and this is where nature comes in. And therefore, building together gray, concrete-based solutions with nature-based solutions allows you to deal in the most cost-effective way with that deep uncertainty. And then finally, it brings so many additional benefits that you cannot get with engineering solutions, all the way from biodiversity to local community benefits to all of those processes if they are designed well. And this is something that I'm going to discuss a little bit later. So 3 messages for the Global Center on Adaptation for nature-based solution scaling up. 3. First, a good important pipeline of large-scale projects, and this is why this panel is so exciting, because these are real projects on the way that are going to show the examples of how this is done. Second, more finance from different actors and different mechanisms. And third, different capacities. These kind of projects needs to be done in a very different way, and therefore it needs a different organizational structure to deal with them. So let me start with a couple of minutes on each. Pipeline of projects. Now, this is an area where your typical engineer is going to be completely out of the comfort zone. Being able to design something that is not just concrete, but is also nature, requires very different perspectives. Understanding that climate is going to influence that project in very radical ways during the lifetime of the asset, over the next 20, 30, 50 years, which is the road that you're designing, which is the water storage dam that you're building, which is the city that is growing. That is exactly a time frame that you don't know, and therefore designing with that flexibility is going to be critical in that pipeline of projects. And then finally, we need from all of these projects a lot more results and data. We need your knowledge, because this is going to be critical for the rest of the world to learn. How you as pioneers in Pakistan, in Vietnam, in the Mekong, are really opening the way. We want to learn as much. So it's not your typical project, let's build, and yes, let's do some evaluation a few years down the line. There's no time for that. We need your knowledge, you need your information, your experience, and this is critical. Let me move to finance. And what is important is that, look, your typical financier feels very comfortable knowing, look, so many cubic meters of concrete, so much of the steel, this is the road, this is the pavement, all that. That is not how to finance. Financing that combined gray and green infrastructure requires a different understanding, especially because the maintenance of those projects are very different. The adaptation and the flexibility is different. You need different mechanisms. Second, this is not, and I repeat, this is not something that should be done only by the public sector. Being able to value the benefits of these solutions, being able to find and connect who is receiving those benefits to provide the financing becomes critical. This is where the experience of WWF comes in. I remember the study that you did in China when I was managing the China program of the World Bank, where you look at 100 different projects, and in China looking at what are the benefits of these nature-based solutions and who can pay. Water utilities, power utilities, cities, the local banks that were interested in protecting their assets, insurance companies that were interested in reducing the risks. So there are so many different actors that can come into this framework, and I think that that's an important area and frontier for financing, because adaptation is everybody's business. It's not a public function only. It's a process. And finally, capacity. As I said at the beginning, this is going to require breaking silos between the engineers and the biodiversity experts. It's going to require breaking silos between government departments that focuses on transportation and on nature. It's going to require this capacity and understanding of different technical specialists on understanding what they're talking about each other. It is really trying to look at a very different way to operate and maintain these systems. Because when you have a gray infrastructure, then you have a certain way of operating and maintain. When you have that combined gray and green, it's a completely different approach that is going to need innovative ways of working around it. So we're looking forward to learn a lot from these examples in Pakistan, in Vietnam, in the Mekong, and part of the function of the Global Center on Adaptation is to collect those measures, is to help raise the profile of these solutions, is to help mobilize a lot more financing for that, because only 20% of the financing for climate is coming to adaptation. And that cannot be. Even if we stay at 1.5 degrees, then adaptation is a must to be able to allow cities, communities, households, industries to survive the impacts of climate change. Thank you so much, Parker.
Yeah, thank you so very much. This is a really good point. You started with the construction engineers being out of their comfort zone, but the financiers are also out of their comfort zone. The project developers are also a little bit out of their comfort zone. So we need all of the sectors to work with each other. This is a very deeply interdisciplinary challenge, and it's great to have some examples of how it's being done on the ground. So, Mr. Minister, I would love to turn to you first. Minister Malik Amin Aslam is the special advisor to the Prime Minister in Pakistan on climate change, and he's here to tell us more about how you are already dealing with these challenges in Pakistan, and tell us a little bit more about the Recharge Pakistan program in particular. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And thanks for inviting me over here to this very important discussion. And just hearing from the Global Center for Adaptation, it's really worrisome that only 20% of climate finance today is going towards adaptation. That needs to be increased at least to 60% if we are to survive the next decade. And the other comment about pushing out of the comfort zone is also very true, and I think we've already pushed nature out of its comfort zone, and nature has reacted. We've seen what happens when nature reacts. The COVID pandemic is a reaction of nature. It's actually a revenge of nature for humans invading the habitat of animals. Similarly, the climate change issue is also, we are really at the threshold of pushing nature by saturating the atmosphere with all these greenhouse gases. Pakistan as a country is really at the forefront of the climate change issue. We are one of the 10 most impacted countries, and we've been on this top 10 list, which is not a good list to be on, for the last 10 years continuously. So this year they came up with a new category called continuously impacted countries, and we're one of the 3 on that list. So we are facing, climate change head on for no fault of ours. I mean, we're not a big emitter, we're less than 1% of the global emissions. We have the whole compendium of climate effects happening in Pakistan, affecting a very large population of about 230 million people. So it's a serious issue for us. It's an issue of real existence and survival for Pakistan. Now, we have a choice in front of us that we can either develop on the same pathway that we've seen the rest of the world develop and lead us into this problem, or we can take a different direction. And as a government and as a policy, we have taken a very strong decision, and which is that we are not part of the problem right now in climate change, but going forward, we want to be part of the solution to climate change, and we don't want to add to the problem of climate change. And for that, we have a very clear vision, which is based on moving towards clean energy, electric mobility, and nature-based solutions. And why I say nature-based solutions is that we've had an experience with nature. We started planting 1 billion trees about in 2014, and that was an investment in nature, which was done by Pakistan itself. And we saw that when we started investing in nature, nature always pays you back, and it pays you back in multiple times, and you get paid back exponentially in economic terms, in social terms, even in political terms. So the investment in nature and the trust in nature, which is missing at the global level, is something that we really need to push. So I would like to thank the WWF for having this discussion, which is on nature-based solutions, because I think the solution to the natural imbalance of climate change lies in nature. We need to go back to nature and invest in nature. Now this initiative that we're talking about over here is a very innovative, and I would say a transformational initiative for Pakistan. What happens in Pakistan is that we are a country which has got one big artery, which is the River Indus, that goes across the country, and it starts at a point which is the second highest point in the world, which is the K2 mountain, and then it goes down to sea level within 2,000 kilometers. So this artery really traverses the full, ecosystems of the world. It has about 12 ecosystems, passes through 12 ecosystems, and it carries the water that comes in from the third pole on top of it, which are the glaciers of the Himalayas, the Karakoram and the Hindu Kush mountains combined in one place. It's called the third pole. And that third pole is melting. So we have these floods coming into Pakistan, and we have a 100-day period, which is in the summers, in which we have this huge deluge of water that comes in, because there are two phenomena which are combining. One is the glacial melt, and the other one is the monsoons which are coming in from the south. So both are, deluging the country with water, goes into this river, and then we flush it down into the Arabian Sea. We actually got a wake-up call in the big flood, the mega flood that we had in 2010. And that flood happened, it almost, 40% of the country was underwater. And then all of this water got flushed down and drained into the Arabian Sea. And as soon as that happened, we were suddenly water scarce in Pakistan. So we had this huge mass of water go through the country, we could not capture it. And then we were in a position in which we were water scarce for the rest of the year. And we had the Ramsar Convention people do a very interesting report in which they said that, this is a crisis for Pakistan, but it can be turned into an opportunity. And the opportunity lies in investing in nature-based solutions. So WWF took the cue from that, and they started developing this initiative because they were on the left and the right bank of this river. We have about 15 wetland sites. Now these are natural wetlands, and these were degrading, whereas this huge mass of water was just going through it every year. About 35 million acre feet of water, which is about, I would say, 4 to 5 times the water that you store by having a dam. So this water was flowing through, and these wetlands on the sides were degrading. So this nature-based solutions connects the two dots. It uses this flood water, diverts it into those wetlands during the flood water months. So two things happen. One is that the wetlands which are degrading start restoring, which is, they create a nature-based solution. And the other one is that the aquifer, which is underneath, also starts recharging when you have this water going into those areas. So it was a win-win project. Lots of jobs, livelihoods, which depend on that waterway get restored. We have estimated about 100 million people will benefit from this initiative in a positive manner. They will get jobs, and their livelihoods, which depend again on that waterway, will enhance. The livelihood of people that depend on those wetland areas will enhance. And at the same time, Pakistan will be using, as I said, turning a crisis into an opportunity by using this huge mass of water to restore the wetlands which are degrading and recharge the groundwater aquifer. Now that's the whole concept. That's the concept of this Recharge Pakistan initiative. WWF, as I said, developed this on the initial stage. We've now had this go to the GCF for its first round of approvals, which it has got, and now it's aiming for a funding of $50 million at the GCF. But at the same time, Pakistan itself is investing in the project. We've got a $40 million development budget allocated to this project, and we're not waiting for that whole financing package to arrive, and we are actually initiating. During the COVID era, we had what was called the Green Stimulus Package, which was arranged through the World Bank. Pakistan was a country which came forward in the COVID era by saying that we want to do things which can invest in nature, but also create green jobs for our people. So we had a lot of people out of jobs because of the urban to rural migration, because of the lockdowns. So we initiated a green stimulus. We got $120 million from the World Bank repurposed for that green stimulus. Now a part of that green stimulus is being used to pilot the first 2 projects on Recharge Pakistan. So while we wait for the GCF and the ADB funding to arrive, this is something we're going to do to kickstart the whole process. It starts next month, and we'll have 2 projects in the KP, the Punjab province and the Sindh province, where we have these 2 wetlands, and we will start off immediately because we think it's an excellent project. It's a project that allows nature to come back, and it allows us to make nature an ally in our development process rather than an adversary. And I think the world, as you mentioned, needs to learn from this experience. And not just this experience, I think the whole experience about nature-based solutions is extremely positive. It is something that while we talk about bricks and mortar, this is the solutions that these are the solutions that really are going to work as we go forward into the next decade. So we are totally convinced that the climate change problem, the answer to the problem lies in investing in nature. We are planting 10 billion trees. We are expanding our protected areas in Pakistan. In the last 1 year, we have added 15 new national parks in Pakistan, covering over 8,000 square kilometers of wilderness. We think all of these initiatives allow you to invest in nature, to create green jobs, to create an economy which is, which has got a solid footing in nature-based solutions. So I think that's the way to go forward, and I would like to again thank WWF for not only this discussion, but also assisting Pakistan in getting onto this track of nature-based solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Excellent trip for us through the Indus Valley. Very lovely, and also important reflection on the point that Eddie made that these nature-based solutions also have social benefits, have job benefits, and this has been a great way for you to come back both from a natural perspective but also from a job perspective, following on the very tough lockdowns as a result of the COVID crisis. I also like your quote that nature always pays you back. Works in both directions, doesn't it? Because we're both seeing the negative impacts already of warming about 1.5 degrees. Nature's paying us back for the way that we've treated our ability to secure carbon over the last 50, 60 years. And if we invest in nature, in turn, it will pay us back in terms of recharge, in terms of natural benefits, in terms of social benefits. So really great. Thank you very much for the trip through the region. I'd love to turn now to Vietnam. I will welcome Mr. Tang Tu Quang, Director of the Department of Climate Change of Vietnam, so we can hear a little bit more about the examples, the climate threats that Vietnam is also facing, and the government's very ambitious program on adaptation. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam. I think I speak in Vietnamese better for my colleagues translate. Kính thưa các ngài chủ tọa, thì Việt Nam là một nước châu Á mà có cái đường bờ biển rất là dài và chịu tác động rất nặng nề của biến đổi khí hậu. Thì các loại hình thiên tai hiện nay là chúng tôi cũng xuất hiện, chỉ trừ sóng thần mà chúng tôi đã phải chống chịu. Đối với Việt Nam chúng tôi đặc biệt thứ nhất là cái vấn đề về các cái khu vực vùng đồng bằng sông Cửu Long, các cái vùng đồng bằng ven biển nó phải chống chịu rất nặng nề với cái nạn hạn hán xâm nhập mặn, rồi là cái tác động của thượng nguồn Mekong đến các cái vùng như vậy của chúng tôi. Ngoài ra là cái dải ven biển rất là dài miền Trung thì chúng tôi chịu rất nhiều về bão lũ hàng năm, và đặc biệt là cái khu vực ở các cái miền núi phía Bắc của chúng tôi cũng chịu tác động về sạt lở rất là lớn. Thế thì xác định được cái vấn đề biến đổi khí hậu là cái vấn đề sống còn của đất nước chúng tôi.
Thank you. So Vietnam is in Asia countries with a long coast of line of long coast, so it's severely impacted by the climate change. So one of the main reasons in the Mekong Delta is like severely impacted by, for example, sunlight intrusions, sea level rise. Coastal line also impacted by the severe typhoons every year, and also the region did not also heavily impacted by landslide.
Tuy nhiên trước cái thách thức đó thì chính phủ của chúng tôi cũng có rất nhiều những cái giải pháp để adapt được cái vấn đề cái biến đổi khí hậu diễn ra trong những năm vừa qua. Ví dụ như là những cái trận mưa lớn vào năm 2015-2016 nó thiệt hại rất nhiều về tài sản, về người. Thế nhưng mà trong cái giai đoạn mà gần đây với những cái giải pháp thích ứng thông minh thì Việt Nam cũng đã giảm được 90% cái tổn thất so với của 29-20 mà so với cái năm 25-26.
However, facing the challenge by the climate change and also by the natural disaster, Vietnam government has put a lot of effort to adapt to the climate change and also to natural disaster. For example, with the flood in 2015 and 2016, there tremendous loss and damage. However, in 2019 and 2020, we managed to reduce 90% of loss and damage compared to that landmark 2015 and 2016 flood.
Cái vấn đề giải pháp thích ứng dựa vào tự nhiên cũng như cái công tác bảo tồn đa dạng sinh học thì được Việt Nam rất là quan tâm, và chúng tôi cũng đã có cái một cái chiến lược, tức là có một cái kế hoạch 5 năm. Hiện nay thì chúng tôi đang chuẩn bị tức là đang bước vào là trồng 1 tỷ cây xanh để phục vụ cho cái vấn đề về hấp thụ khí nhà kính và thích ứng với biến đổi khí hậu.
Also, the natural-based solutions and also the issue of biodiversity is also the focus of the government. We have the plan for 5 years, and also we plan to plant 1 billion green plants in order to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions.
Vào năm 2020, năm trước đây thì chúng tôi đã rà soát cập nhật cái NDC của chúng tôi. Trong đó nó có các cái hợp phần về giảm nhẹ và cả thích ứng, và cái hợp phần về hài hòa đồng lợi ích giữa các cái hành động khí hậu với cái phát triển bền vững của Việt Nam.
Also, in
and how to
2020, we have
harmonize
reviewed and
and
updated
economic
our
development
NDC.
and
In that, we include
environment
both adaptation
protection.
and mitigation component, as long also with the synergy and co-benefit components.
Ngoài cái việc nỗ lực cam kết trong NDC của chúng tôi thì hiện nay là chúng tôi cũng đã Thủ tướng đã ban hành, Thủ tướng Việt Nam đã ban hành cái kế hoạch quốc gia thích ứng với biến đổi khí hậu với cái tầm nhìn đến 2050.
Also, besides our commitment, also the Prime Minister had adopted the National Adaptation Plan with the vision until 2050.
Và đó cũng là một cái bộ phận để chúng tôi đang formulate cái chiến lược quốc gia biến đổi khí hậu với cái chiến lược phát thải thấp dài hạn và các cái chiến lược thích ứng lâu dài ở Việt Nam đến 2050.
So that serves as the foundation for us to develop our national climate change strategy, long-term low emission development, and also other adaptation strategies.
Thì Việt Nam cũng như Pakistan và một số nước châu Á khác thì vấn đề về thích ứng mà dựa vào tự nhiên, dựa vào các hệ sinh thái là một cái nội dung rất quan trọng trong cái giải pháp chiến lược của chúng tôi.
So we from Vietnam also along with Pakistan and other developed countries, natural-based adaptation is one of the key solutions in our adaptation strategy.
Và các cái hành động thực tế của các cái vùng miền khác nhau của chúng tôi có với cái đặc thù phải thích ứng với các cái giải pháp khác nhau, thì chúng tôi cũng người dân của chúng tôi, cộng đồng của chúng tôi đang nghiên cứu các cái giải pháp mà thích ứng dựa vào tự nhiên nhưng mà trên cơ sở là các cái giải pháp thông minh.
So because of the geographic locations of Vietnam, so different regions had to adapt to climate change differently. So that's why the community had to propose and develop a different and smart climate adaptations.
Chúng ta cái hội thảo hôm nay cũng có cái chủ đề nó rất quan trọng và nó cũng đang chúng ta cũng đã nghe trong mấy ngày vừa qua, từ trước khi COP diễn ra và đến nay thì các vấn đề tổn thất thiệt hại và các vấn đề thích ứng với biến đổi khí hậu nó đã trở thành một nội dung rất quan trọng trong COP26.
So our side event today is a very important meeting, especially consider with the negotiation before COP. So the loss and damage and also the adaptation to climate change is one of the key issues at the COP26.
Chính phủ của chúng tôi cũng đang đề ra các cái nghị quyết mà gọi là đưa ra các giải pháp thích ứng cho các cái vùng khác nhau, ví dụ đồng bằng sông Cửu Long, ven biển miền Trung và các cái vùng núi phía Bắc.
So our government is currently developing several resolutions with different measures and solutions to different regions. For example, the Mekong Delta or the northern regions or the coastal area.
Chúng tôi hôm nay cũng mong muốn rằng là WWF rồi Trung tâm Thích ứng Toàn cầu và các cái đối tác phát triển khác, các nước cũng quan tâm và đồng hành với chúng tôi, Việt Nam, để nó là cái nước mà dễ bị tổn thương, để làm sao có những cái mô hình mà thích ứng thông minh, phát triển bền vững mà dựa vào các cái điều kiện tự nhiên và cộng đồng của chúng ta, để làm sao mà chúng ta sẽ có những cái tránh được những cái tổn thất thiệt hại lớn trong tương lai.
So we hope that the WWF, CCA, and together with other development partners, we continue to join hands with Vietnam to develop climate resilient and sustainable development models, so that we can mitigate the loss and damage in the future.
Tôi trân trọng cảm ơn WWF và Trung tâm Thích ứng Toàn cầu cùng với các cái bên liên quan chúng ta ngồi đây tổ chức cái sự kiện hôm nay có ý nghĩa rất là quan trọng, để những cái thảo luận hôm nay của chúng ta sẽ là những cái nội dung để mà gắn vào các cái mục tiêu đàm phán trong khuôn khổ COP26 trong những ngày tới.
So lastly, I would like to take this opportunity to extend my sincere appreciation to WWF, GCA, and other parties for organizing this side event. Today's discussion will be very meaningful to the achievement of the negotiation target under COP26. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the partnership, appreciate all of the work that you've been doing to reduce the loss and damages by investing in nature. Also for the social benefits that come from that investment in nature. And I think we'll hear a lot over the course of the week, if you're paying attention to the discussions about adaptation, on this challenge of floods and flood management and droughts and drought management. So climate really is hitting us in the first instance through water. These are some great examples. I'd like to now turn to, we've got a recorded message. Our next guest Justine Shapiro-Klein is here joining us virtually from New York, so she's recorded for us. But I understand one of her colleagues, Hank Nyber, is here from EcoShape, if we have any questions for him. With that, I'd like to turn to the video so we can see a little bit more about what's happening in the Mekong Delta.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to share our recent work on the assessment of nature-based solutions in the Mekong Delta. This project was developed under the leadership of WWF in Vietnam and abroad and supported by a team that included EcoShape, One Architecture, and Royal Haskoning DHV. The study drew upon research, analysis, and team expertise to develop 2 site-specific pilots with broader applicability across their regions and for other Asian deltas. We focused on areas in the lower Mekong where nature-based approaches might effectively restore and protect natural systems, and we sought to align these proposals with the sustainable development ambitions of the government of Vietnam. In Dong Thap province, our goals include improving riverine flood management, water storage, and refertilization of agricultural lands. In Kamau, we focused on sustainable coastal erosion management and flood risk reduction. Our work begins with studying the context of this unique landscape, home to over 21 million people. The Mekong Delta is a land of water with an extensive network of rivers and man-made canals. It is the lowest large delta in the world, more than 1 meter below mean sea level, and the delta continues to sink and shrink. Wet season floods play an important role in land building and securing agricultural fertility, but they can also lead to crop and property loss. Dam construction upstream is capturing sediment, reducing the coastal plume, and directly contributing to coastal erosion. Other pressures and challenges in the area include salinization due to sediment starvation and riverbed incision, riverbank erosion, which is exacerbated by development encroachment, and land subsidence, stemming from natural processes, but also human activities. While nature-based or hybrid green-gray solutions could be very effective in dealing with most of these challenges, the magnitude of the issues requires an integrated approach. We need to understand the whole system, social, political, economic, and institutional. This system understanding is key. I'll turn first to Dong Thap province. The upper delta supports extensive agricultural production. This area used to be characterized by naturally occurring deep floods in the wet season. To facilitate a third rice crop and promote development, local communities have developed an extensive, uncoordinated system with around 20,000 kilometers of dikes. Unfortunately, these actions have reduced flood storage and undermined natural processes. The infrastructure inhibits the beneficial effects of flooding, including counteracting subsidence through sediment deposition, replenishing soil fertility, and supporting groundwater recharge. As a result, we have seen decreasing economic efficiency of rice production and increasing vulnerability due to climate change. While the system largely protects against lower floods, extreme floods will still overtop these structures. As we began to explore how nature-based solutions might play a role in the system, we mapped stakeholders to visualize their roles and relationships. We also sought to understand priorities. For example, the government's ambition to increase the forest area from 4 to 15%. The Trem Chin pilot integrates conservation measures with floodplain restoration for improved agricultural productivity combined with new livelihood models. It focuses on enhanced water resource management to demonstrate the benefits of controlled flooding. It also exemplifies how an area-wide strategy can reduce overall flood risk. Its components include expanding the functional habitat area of the national park by partnering with nearby agricultural communities where there are existing high dikes, formalizing the transition zone through designation or legislation, and modifying infrastructure to facilitate controlled wet season flooding. We also began to consider what strategies might best support sustainable livelihoods. Some ideas include alternative farming practices and crops that accommodate changing water levels, creating branding for biodiversity responsible farming practices or supporting organic certification, and diversifying through wet season ecotourism, and last, developing a grant-making mechanism to compensate farmers for flood storage. In addition to these ideas, we propose initiating community-based monitoring and analysis to assess the beneficial impacts of flooding on sedimentation, soil quality, groundwater recharge, agricultural productivity, and biodiversity. And finally, protecting and enhancing river corridors and canals through land use planning and plantings that stabilize shorelines. The pilot will demonstrate how conservation areas and agricultural lands can become complementary and functionally continuous for habitat creation. Controlled flooding is not a new concept, and these strategies for floodplain restoration apply across the upper delta and can be scaled up over time. The pilot can demonstrate the benefit of institutionalizing seasonal flooding as part of a flood risk management strategy. Now, I'd like to shift to Kamau. The Kamau Peninsula was historically created by sediment deposits from the Mekong River and has been developed from mangrove swamps into a vast agricultural landscape over the past half-century. Today, shrimp farms are encroaching on and degrading the coastal mangrove belt. This means reduced capacity to capture sediment, dissipate wave energy, and mitigate flooding. The challenges are further exacerbated by declining sediment availability from the Mekong River due to dam building, groundwater pumping, and poor management of wastewater discharge and solid waste. As a result, in many locations, the mangrove belt is unstable, squeezed between coastal dike systems and rising seas. We chose to study a site where the dike system has not yet been constructed. But even here, mangroves are threatened with erosion, salt intrusion, and further risk of habitat loss and inundation due to sea level rise and coastal storms. Here too, understanding stakeholders and relationships is key to understanding their benefits from a project. The Kamau pilot demonstrates the potential for sustainable development integrated with mangrove restoration, a triple bottom line proposition that combines disaster risk reduction with social and environmental benefits. The pilot must be adaptable, designing for the immediate future as well as shifts in the coming decades related to sea level rise and demographic and agricultural developments. It values the ecosystem services that mangroves provide by connecting restoration methodologies with investment in local livelihoods and establishes a regulatory framework for long-term growth. In this way, the pilot can support resilient communities. It aims to capture the return on investment in a sustainable region through increased tourism revenues and aquaculture productivity. Our mangrove restoration approach focuses on stabilizing coastal retreat. It begins with sediment analysis to refine the restoration approach and objectives. We propose updating the framework for mangrove belt protection, targeting 70% coverage within 4 kilometers of today's coastline, new guidelines for habitat continuity, and reserving inland areas for future succession with sea level rise. Natural breakwaters can reduce wave energy and support regeneration, and collaborative wastewater and solid waste management can reduce runoff and pollution. The restoration approaches are paired with economic opportunities. For example, introducing alternative aquaculture and innovations for productivity, creating a certification of integrated mangrove aquaculture, diversifying with seasonal ecotourism, and fostering payments for ecosystem services to compensate the local population for participating in restoration activities. Last, institutional embedding is key. This means updated land use guidelines and a process for monetizing mangrove benefits to compensate some farmers for relocation from the coastal zone. This pilot can inform the approach to coastal restoration and management of shrinking mangrove forests, and demonstrate how nature-based investment can improve livelihoods and restore biodiversity, along with agricultural productivity, while buying time for long-term planning. So how can we advance this work? There is no one-size-fits-all approach to funding projects like these. We will need to look to a mix of public funding combined with private investment. Given the longer timelines and lower degree of predictability for nature-based infrastructure, we need to use public money to de-risk the project. Examples include through project development funds, which support project preparation and can demonstrate its financial feasibility and risk profile, and viability gap funds, which can make an economically, socially, and environmentally important project financially feasible. Emerging tools and innovative financing mechanisms might play a role in private financing. For example, pay for performance, impact bonds, and impact financing. The intrinsic exchange is a solution to watch. Private domestic investors may be more willing than foreign investors to take on certain risks, and diaspora bonds for nature-based infrastructure could leverage communities abroad. Bringing together partners and expertise in preparation brings down the cost of capital, reducing construction and operation risks downstream. And we need banks, funds, donors, and governments to increase their funding to scale up implementation. These ideas are a starting point. Studies like this are laying the groundwork for successful implementation. These are not radical ideas, but practical context-based strategies that have in some cases already seen success through other projects. We are building on what we have already learned. Thank you.
Thank you very much to EcoShape. I really appreciate the trip down to the Mekong Delta. And right now I'd like to go back to Pakistan for a minute and welcome our colleague from WWF Pakistan. Can we get Masood on the screen? He's coming. Dr. Masood Arshad is the Senior Director on Climate, Water, and Food with WWF Pakistan. And we'll get a visit to Pakistan as well.
Can you hear me now?
Over to you, Masood. Welcome.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
1 second, Masood. We can hear you, but not in the room.
Okay.
Now it's good.
Okay. So thank you, distinguished delegates. I really feel honored and excited for the opportunity to talk about this at this August forum at COP26. Great day for all of us here in Pakistan and also those who are attending in Glasgow and also across the WWF network, that this Rechild Pakistan has been officially launched today at COP26 by World Minister Malik Bin Aslam Saab. And let me reiterate that he has been a great sport throughout and has always provided a leadership role in moving this initiative to this level. Just don't want to go into that detail, but I just wanted to share that Pakistan is blessed with glaciers that feed into the mighty Indus River and serving as a food basket to the millions of people. Then we have got the monsoon rains for 3 months and then the winter rains. But on the other hand, we're also a victim of grave mismanagement of the precious resource. You can see some of the statistics here that Pakistan is one of the 10% of the bottom countries and also with the country with the highest per capita water use. So if you look at the example here, in Pakistan, we claim that climate change is water change. So water scarcity is increasing due to decline in water availability and unpredicted rainfalls with increased intensity and frequency. So that leads to frequent droughts and flooding events. And this entire situation is approximately costing Pakistan 4% of the GDP that comes out to be $12 billion per year. This is according to a World Bank report. So if you when we talk about the floods and floodplain management in this in this context, it always reminded me that of Gilbert White, that is an American geographer, who is called the father of floodplain management. He's always say that floods are acts of God, but flood losses are definitely largely acts of man. So actually, we ourselves are responsible for such losses, because the way we encroach the floodplains, the way we use them, and the way we change and divert the water flows, it has a major impact on our country. The 2010 floods, as already explained by our minister, it was an eye-opener and lesson to learn for all of us. So you can see the scale of inundation. 1/5 of the country was under floods. So millions of people were destroyed, and houses were destroyed, agricultural land was affected. And if you look at the huge financial impact that it has on national economy, a developing country like Pakistan cannot afford such a huge loss. Even today, after a decade or so, the existing infrastructure is unable to cope with unprecedented levels of rainfall and flooding. We have witnessed 6 more floods after the 2010 catastrophe, and now it is high time that we take action to help the landscape better deal with such situations. How do we improve the infrastructure to better cope with floods? I think this is the main question that we need to ask today about this thing. If you look at the structured and non-structured approaches towards flood and hazard risk management are available. So we are already investing huge amount of our national resources in developing hard infrastructure to cope with these increasing flooding events, but have observed over the years that these are not enough. So we have to, in any case, focus our energies and investment to nature-based solutions and non-infrastructure measures as well. Developing appropriate legislations, comprehensive land use planning to watershed and wetlands management, soil conservation measures, and natural drain pathways, and riparian vegetation restoration are some of the globally tried and tested nature-based solutions which can be very effective for Pakistan. So a holistic flood management approach is needed to address flood risk and to build resilient communities and ecosystems. So talking about the reach of Pakistan, as already talked by our minister, so it is one of its first kind of initiative in the country that focuses on ecosystem-based adaptation approach, which comes with a whole range of direct and indirect benefits. And as we have seen, nature-based solutions has really emerged as one of the most viable options for mitigating the impacts of climate change and addressing climate vulnerabilities. The first phase is 10 years duration with an estimated investment of approximately $150 million. And we're expecting a total of at least 50 million from GCF. Rest would be the co-financing. This project talks about 3 different components. The first component talks about the implementation of the ecosystem-based interventions at 6 selected sites. The second talks about the addressing the climate vulnerability of the vulnerable communities by building their climate resilience. And the third component talks about the enabling environment for NBS within the country, so that this is entirely mainstream within the government's planning agenda at all levels. So when we talk about where we need to implement our interventions, so there are more than 11 potential sites initially proposed as a result of consultation with the national and provincial governments. So previous experiences of working in such areas and the potential of water conservation, floodplain management, and wetlands and watershed restoration, we applied a specific set of criteria to further shortlist the best 6 sites for detailed investigation. So physical, socioeconomic, and environmental criteria were used, and the climate rationale was on the top while taking decisions about these sites. So how we are going to implement these nature-based solutions? When we talk about the nature-based solutions, we'll discuss about their scale and scope. So which is at landscape level. That could be a watershed, that could be a river and belt, or a coastal zone. It shares an insight into the architect of both the hard and soft solutions and help us that how the NBS are so cost effective than the engineered approaches with multiple direct and indirect benefits. So one good thing about the NBS is that they work best when these are designed, implemented, and monitored by and in partnership with local stakeholders, including the indigenous communities who have a rich knowledge about the region and practices they are implementing. If you see from the examples given below, you can see protection, restoration, reconnection, enhancement, revival, and improvement are some of the few key points which have been highlighted in this, and they are very well applicable to our floodplains, wetlands, hill torrents, headwaters, and riparian zones, and this is where the future of nature-based solutions lies in our case. This is an example of how the hybrid approach works. Just want to tell you that NBS also works very well with this structure. So this can improve its working, improve the catchment area, and avoid the structure's further degradation and enhance its effectiveness, and ultimately helps in avoiding flood risk. We can lobby and advocate for inclusion of NBS in infrastructure-related projects and programs in order to enhance their lives. So this is a classic example of our project sites under Reach Eye Pakistan. So Manchar wetlands is in the center. Hill torrents in blue provides water to the wetland, and the Indus River on the right side, it also provides water to the wetland. But this water is not coming due to the range of governance and existing infrastructure issues. The NBS nature-based solutions will play its effective role and can improve catchment-related issues, enhance the natural drain pathways, and also reconnect the rivers with the wetlands after consulting all these major stakeholders of the region. So this is how the hybrid approach can also work very well. So just looking at how the expertise of WWF network and the policies and partnership with the government will work together in order to build the resilient communities and ecosystems through implementation of these nature-based solutions. So WWF's overall freshwater practice aims at keeping the impacts of extreme weather events. So it means by restoring and reconnecting wetlands with the rivers is a major thing. Keeping deltas above the rising sea, making sure that the sediments reach to the delta and the mangroves are there to stand firm against the wave action, which is basically the first line of defense, and enhancing water security. Once again, the reconnection is so important in this case as well. So soaking up storm surges, vegetation cover improvement, and mangroves upper plantation is also one of the major impacts on this. And on the other hand, expecting the government to support in terms of legislations and policies, engaging subnational and national stakeholders for ownership. This is one lesson learned from Reach Eye Pakistan. Engage the right stakeholders throughout the process. You will make sure that the ownership is all there at all the stages. And this is one big success story of this initiative. And thanks once again to the worthy Minister Malik Amin himself for his leadership role in this initiative. So, and approximately $150 million investment is required to implement nature-based solutions at 6 landscapes across the river Indus. So this is the first 10-year phase of the Reach Eye Pakistan, expecting $50 million from the GCF, but the rest has to be covered by in the form of co-financing. I'm so pleased to share that $40 million have already been allocated by the Ministry of Water Resources, one of the implementing partners to this Reach Eye Pakistan, thus showing its ownership of the initiative. Similarly, Ministry of Climate Change has also invested, is investing like more than $40 million on this. NDRMF support through MOCC is also in discussion at the moment for another $15 million to the cause. Potential private contributions are also being discussed and with some financial institutions for bankable projects and ideas. Still needed to bring in more resources. I'm very pleased to see the role of Global Center for Adaptation for the investment in Asia on nature-based solutions. Pakistan is one of the top 10 countries most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change for the last more than a decade or so. So our revised NDCs also talks about additional funding commitment from donors, approximately $7 to $14 billion per annum for climate adaptation to avoid climate-induced risks and hazards. So we have to finalize our funding proposal commitment as in part of the next steps, and then which is also to have to complete some of the crucial studies, which is a GCF requirement, and some of the co-financing commitment for that. We're engaging private sector, financial institutions, and other multilateral donors who are interested in joining hands with the flagship initiative of Pakistan. And again say that there's a lot of learning for this, for us, for the country, WWF network, and the global community as a whole. Because the scale and scope we are talking, nothing has been learned so far from elsewhere. So there are great opportunities of investment in this initiative. So this is all from my side, and thank you once again for listening about this wonderful initiative from Pakistan, and happy to answer questions if any. My freshwater and climate and energy colleagues are there, and the delegation from Pakistan, I'm happy to respond on anything that comes the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for Masoud for joining us. Thank you to all of you for joining us online. It's been fantastic to see these real live examples that it is possible to invest in nature. There are real examples of projects happening now, gathering finance now, both public and private, and delivering benefits both for nature and for people, because we're already seeing the impacts of climate hit us. It's happening through water. I want to thank you again all for joining me. Thank you, Eddie Vasquez, for joining us from the Global Center on Adaptation. And please join us with the Global Center on Adaptation for the water adaptation communities. Please look for those. And I want to thank you again, Director Tang Tu Quang, for joining us and sharing your experience in Vietnam. We very much appreciate it. Thank you for the interpretation. My thanks again to Minister Malik Amin Aslam, from the Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on Pakistan for climate change, and to my colleague Manuel Pulgar Vidal from our climate and energy practice. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful rest of the COP. Let's deliver some adaptation finance.